It's a way to protect ourselves from experiencing danger. And arousal, the cluster of arousal comes out a lot of times. People have anger problems, and certainly in the shelter, folks, conflicts arise, can actually erupt very quickly because of perceived, misperceived danger or misperceived offenses towards somebody, right? And you might be able to tick off a number of clients that you work with that you might say, boy, they have an anger problem, or they themselves say to you, wow, I really got an anger problem. I got to really work on my anger. And what's interesting about that is that it's really, there's a very real brain. The roots of that are at the brain level. But also hypervigilance. Here's one huge example that I like to use in the shelter context. As I mentioned, I work Friday nights in Madison at the Single Women Shelter, and so on Friday night I've already worked 40 hours doing the work that I do with difficult populations, and then I'm going to go and I'm going to work another 6 hours in a shelter. And so at 6:30 in Madison, the Single Women Shelter office door opens. And before I go to that door, before I turn that knob, I stop for a minute and really just pull myself together and say, whatever crap happened over the week, whatever I'm sort of irritated about, I've got to really let that go away for now. We're going to let that wash back out for now, so that when I open the door, I can smile and say, ladies, it's Friday, come on in. Because when I open the door and I look outside the door, there's going to be 10, 15 women whose all their eyes are on my face, determining what my facial expression looks like, to determine whether or not tonight is going to go okay. Because they've learned to read faces, right? They've learned to know what expressions mean. Oh, this staff is cranky today, or this staff is mad today, or this staff, and that may or may not be true. You may just have a lot on your mind, and you're kind of a little preoccupied, so maybe you're not all sort of genuinely smiley. So hypervigilance is one of those ways where, or one of those ideas where people are constantly aware of their environment in a very hyper way, just knowing where they are, maybe where the doors are, where it's safe. They know to monitor people's facial expressions, particularly staff and people of authority. So understanding that hypervigilance for me is really important, because and one of the ways that I translate that into how to affect how I do my job is that I literally stop and go, okay, we are here at 6:30. These women have had a long week, so I'm going to pull myself together, try to put a genuine smile on my face, and just welcome them and say, hey ladies, let's start the evening. So we've been talking about the different concepts of trauma versus traumatic stress. We understand that PTSD is a clinical label. We also understand something we're kind of going to call it complex trauma right now, and that is kind of differentiating between the kind of sequelae reaction, the behavioral reaction to somebody that might experience a one-time trauma event, like say your house burned down, and now it's over, and you may have different clusters or constellations of behavior and symptoms, and then as you work through it in whatever way you do, those symptoms may ease up. Versus complex trauma is kind of a much more pervasive condition in truly injury, because this was trauma that was sustained over the course of time. And I think we see a lot of folks that we might, it might be reasonable to say they dealt with complex trauma. It's not officially a DSM diagnosis yet, and in fact, there's been some talk of maybe calling what we know to be borderline personality disorder, which is a which is a term that most mental health practitioners want to stay as far away from as possible. Those behaviors that, that used to be called borderlines. Borderlines do this, and they're really annoying, and they're really hard to work with. There has been some talk of perhaps starting to call borderline personality disorder complex trauma. Because when you actually start to take a look, again, you drop the trauma lens into those behaviors and you say, wait, how did those behaviors get molded? This was through years and years of trauma. So, trauma, injury of memory, and we understand it to be an injury of memory because now that we can see inside the brain, we are having, it's such an exciting thing. We're developing a much clearer understanding of the neurobiology of trauma. Like what we know today, we didn't know 5 years ago, and that stuff we didn't know 10 years ago. And in another year, we're going to have some even more clear information. So it's a very young field of study, but it's a very exciting field to follow. And we can actually see the injury in the brain. You can see trauma in the brain thanks to brain imaging. And one of the areas happens to be called the hippocampus, which is our memory bank. The volume of the hippocampus in traumatized people actually shrinks. However, people who do some trauma treatment, lots of different forms that can take, and really start to recover from their traumatic experiences, this effect actually can be reversed. And we've seen that on the imaging as well. Okay, so one of the things about trauma-informed care, or trauma itself, is that it's a lot about the brain. In fact, I like to say it's all about the brain. And if you take a look at this little brain schema here, this would be a brain sliced down the middle through the middle of the forehead, and the person's forehead would be pointing to your right if you're looking at the screen. So the forehead would be where it says neocortex. Okay, that's right behind the forehead there. And so this is what you would see when you take a cross-section of the brain. And when it is really an evolutionary concept. We really understand this, this neurodevelopment, not only sort of physiologically development as we from babies grow up to adults, but also in an evolutionary way. If we take a look at what they often call the reptilian brain or the primitive brain, and that is, it's where it says the reptilian complex, that sort of peach color, all the way down to the pink brain stem. All right. Now I like to call that body brain because it's all about survival. And it takes care of us. It basically, takes care of our equilibrium, right? Because if we had to sit there and try to remember, like, okay, am I making my blood go through my blood vessels? Am I blinking enough? Am I breathing? Am I getting oxygen to my muscles? Am I moving the digestion through? All of that stuff. If we had to keep track of that, we'd never get anything done, right? So the body brain handles that for us. It also has been developed to keep us safe. So if I were a cave person, and I've been called worse, but if I were a cave person or a Neanderthal, and I'm gathering berries out there in the forest or the jungle or wherever, and I see a tiger, and if I were to think too much about the tiger and what should I do, if I were to go, tiger. Now, didn't didn't that one guy about 2 caves over, didn't he get eaten by a tiger recently? Well, gosh, maybe I should run then. But if I run, what am I going to do with my basket of berries? I might spill them all, and then I wouldn't have anything to eat. If I stopped and tried to think that all through, of course, the tiger would eat me, right? So the body brain actually was built to, you see the tiger through your eyes, it comes into the amygdala and gets your body going. You don't even think about it. It's, I see the tiger, I've got to run. And there's no other thinking process that's involved in that, because it's going to keep you safe. It's kind of like when a mom sees their kid underneath the car